morning. Hello, greetings and peace, etc. I'm really happy for you all to be here today. I hope you've all had a chance to come down to the Susu building where we're having an exhibition on this. If not, then we're here for this entire week until Friday afternoon, inshallah. So today we're very lucky to have an excellent speaker here, speaking on one of his specialist topics, which is Islamic civilization. Dr. Stef Keris was born in Athens and raised in Germany. Dr. Keris accepted Islam at the age of 20 after 3 years of researching and contemplating. Since then, he's travelled to many different countries working as a teacher. He's been lecturing for about 25 years and has therefore a lot of wisdom to share with us today. So inshallah, let's begin speaking on the topic of connect to Islamic civilization, Dr. Stef Keris.
Thank you very much. I think everybody hears me. Do I have to hold it really? Do I really?
No, I was just having you.
Shall I just give me a second? Now, yeah, if we do it like this, I think I'm sure everybody hears me, right? I can scream also. You know, we Greeks are famous for when we talk to each other, you know, we are quite loud like the Italians. You're Italiano, you know? Italiano. But we're not Italians, we are Greeks. There's still a big difference. Now, alhamdulillah, nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina. Man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlil fala hadiya lahu. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu amma ba'd. Don't worry, it's going to be in English, okay? It was just an introduction, a dua that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam or Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, would always make before he starts a speech. Now again, I would like to welcome you to the Islam Awareness Week here in Southampton. It's the second day today, right? Tuesday. And you had one excellent speaker yesterday already, who came close to my area. He was Portuguese yesterday, right? The one who was here. Now, I'm Greek, and I heard there's another Greek going to be here on Friday, inshallah, right? Thursday or Friday, how's that, Georges? Okay. Now, that's amazing, isn't it? That suddenly we get Islamic knowledge from the non-Arabs and from Europeans, actually. We are all reverts. I mean, people have accepted Islam, embraced Islam several years ago. Now, in my case, 22 years ago. I introduced myself last time when I was here. Just a quick, very general idea about myself. Of Greek origin, grown up in Germany. I have all my degrees from University of Aachen in Germany. Have studied political science as a main subject and several languages. And got stuck to something very important. What we had to do during the time that I was studying political science, we had to look into civilization, culture, different people, different cultures, and I decided to look into cultures all over the world, but especially the Islamic cultures. Now, what I've been doing for the last 3 years, I've been doing a lot of research on Islam and Islamic civilization in Europe. So, starting somewhere in Eastern Europe, as we all are aware, we know Bosnia, we know the Balkan countries like Albania, Greece, Turkey. So these are all countries that have either a big Islamic minority or had a big Muslim past. Now, what about Spain? What about Portugal? What about Italy? What about this very country here? What about Britain? Okay, anybody has any idea about Britain, for example? If we start talking about, the title is correctly the hidden debt of Islamic civilization. Hidden debt. Why do we call it hidden? What about this country? Any ideas? And by the way, one thing. I am not the person who starts, has an hour speech, you fall asleep, and after half an hour you ask me questions. Please don't. I want you while we're busy. I want you while I'm busy here now. I want you to ask me questions now. So I want you also to answer my questions. So, first question. What do we know about Islamic civilization in this very country, in the UK, in Britain?
University of Southampton, ISARC.
Excellent. The ISARC of the University of Southampton. Islamic heritage in Southampton. Absolutely great. Thank you.
I'm the best one.
Thank you. All right. Anything else? Yes.
I think it started only 200 years ago, not far away.
So 200 years ago is not bad. So what?
I think with some reverts, old one started.
Any names? Any ideas?
I don't remember, but there's documentary about him. But I can't even remember the city.
I think it's to mention it. Yeah, mention the name of it.
Abdullah Quilliam?
Sheikh Abdullah William, have you ever heard of him? Anybody ever heard of him? He was, what do they say here? People who live in Liverpool, can I check your knowledge, by the way? Who is British? English, I mean not British, who is English? Do you have any English people, white English people here? You know? Anybody there? You look at it, even if you're Irish, please. No, no. What are the inhabitants of Liverpool called? Sorry? Scousers? I've never heard of that. I was expecting Liverpudlian, right? Isn't it Liverpudlian? Okay. All right, Jazakallah, thank you. Now, Liverpudlians. Okay, so Abdullah William was from Liverpool. Okay, and he lived in the 19th century, and he was very British, and he embraced Islam that time, in the 19th century, after having been, he was a solicitor, he was a lawyer actually, he was a lawyer in Liverpool, and he embraced Islam as being basically the first known British Muslim. Now I have to be careful with that because there were more before, but the first one who came out with Islam, who openly declared being Muslim, who set up an orphanage in Liverpool, which by the way has been restored nowadays. Whoever's interested to find out more about your country's history with regards to Islamic heritage, and please go to Liverpool. There is still the house that they mentioned that Abdullah William used to live in, which he changed into a library. There was a certain section that he made a library out of it, a certain section he made an orphanage, another one again a school, and so on. It's a massive building. Please, if you have the chance to go there, they are trying now to reinstate it, to put it back in its former glory. Now, there's still a part nowadays in this, in that building, which is still used as a mosque, as he used to use it. So this one is fully functioning now, since last Ramadan, last year. So, Islamic heritage in Britain. Now, Liverpool, number one. Which one is the first mosque that was ever established? Anybody has any idea in this country?
Working?
Walking, that's what people say.
Cardiff.
Cardiff, that's what people wrongly say.
Is it in Surrey?
Surrey, which one?
Kent? Somewhere?
Actually, it is the one in Liverpool. It is the one that Abdullah William, his house, he made it a mosque. He made a certain part of the house a mosque. Okay? But the one that has the looks of a mosque, if you want to call it that, we'll be coming to speak about this one. The one that really has a very Indian style type of looking thing is the one in Woking. Okay? And this is basically the first mosque in the UK, which has the looks of a mosque. But the first mosque in the UK was the one in Liverpool. Okay? And that's, after this one, everything, took its course. I mean, we have many mosques throughout London, of course. The Islamic Centre's Regent's Park Mosque, of course, is well known. The East London Mosque is well known. And several other mosques throughout the country. Okay? So it is not entirely new, and as people, again, wrongly believe, it's not something people brought to them in the 60s when they came here. It is definitely not certain people's parents here who came in the 60s or 70s to this country to work as guest workers, you know, like the contract workers in Germany or in Holland or in Belgium. No. Islam was part of this country already 200 years ago. This is not just a small amount. Plus, we should not forget, before the time that the British Empire, part of the British Empire was India, and the Indian subcontinent, which nowadays is divided into Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, and over there, I mean, Pakistan is a Muslim country, Bangladesh is a Muslim country. So, massive amount of Muslims. So the British knew how to deal with them. Plus, India was ruled by Muslims hundreds of years, centuries before the British arrived in India. The Mughal Empire was the last one, 300 years. But before them, there were other Muslims, Muslim dynasties that was ruling India. Okay? So now, these are important facts actually to remember. I don't know, some of you, if you remember the last time that we stopped, we spoke about certain of the keywords that I have here on the board. Can you all see them? Light maybe a little bit, can we dim it a little bit? A bit. We spoke about some of them. Actually, we spoke about all of them. We mentioned Fraxine, Alfama, Zulejos, but we're not going to speak about all of them nowadays. Oh, up to there, yes. Yes. Okay. All right, so basically, let's take a look at the words that I have there. Any word you know, any word you would like to maybe mention what it means, anything that you have in mind, any comment, anything you know. And it's Islam Awareness Week, and I'm very, very happy to assume that some of you are non-Muslims, so I welcome you especially. Any non-Muslims in the audience? Nice, thank you very much. This is one of the biggest group that I've seen until now. That's great. Good, so, any ideas? Any other word? No? No ideas. So, you've never heard of vaccine? You've never heard of Alfama? You don't know what moros are? You've never heard of Cordoba? Come on, I don't believe that.
Spain.
Let's start with Cordoba, the easiest one. Cordoba. Where, what, how, why? You're talking about Islamic civilization. What does a city in Spain, I give you that, what does a city in Spain do there on the board? When we're talking about Islamic civilization. What does Spain have to do with Islamic civilization? Why is Cordoba on the board? No, really, I'm not going to wait to give you a Q&A at the end. No, I want to hear now.
Science and knowledge in universities.
Science and knowledge university. So what does it have to do with Islamic civilization then?
Well, these we Muslims claim that the knowledge from all Greek translated through Spain, Islamic Spain, and brought back to Europe.
Excellent.
And this is the basis for modern universities, Oxford.
Okay, listen carefully what the brother says, right? What's your name, sir?
Abdul Baqi.
Abdul Baqi. Now, did you hear what he said? Muslims claim that Islamic civilization brought ancient Greek sources back to Europe. Something like that, you said, right?
Yes.
Okay? So, did you hear that? The wording is very important. They claim, and Greek sources were basically translated and brought over to Europe. That's all they did. Any other idea? Maybe the ones who were here last time? Is this all they did? Is this all what happened in Cordoba? What was Cordoba? The center of the world, once. Cordoba was once the center of the world. The second largest city in Europe after Constantinople. After Constantinople, the second largest city in Europe. Constantinople was a Christian city, and Cordoba was a very Muslim city. For more than 600 to 700 years. From 711 up to 1492. Spain as a whole, the Iberian Peninsula, as well as Portugal. That's the Iberian Peninsula. Now, why rightly the title is The Hidden Debt is simply because we really do not know a lot about it. And this is even the part that we do know something about. Imagine. We do know something about Al-Andalus, as the Muslims called Spain and Portugal. We do know something about it. But what if I ask you now about Fraxinet, France? What if I ask you something about Switzerland? I'm going to really, today, be sure that you're going to have, an explosion of your brains, because certain things you will hear, and you can check them all up, right? It's not my idea just. But I'm going to tell you one thing. Do you know that Switzerland used to be part of the Muslim world for 60 years? Do you know that? There were Muslims trading in Switzerland, in St. Gallen, which is all the way in the north of Switzerland, to the border of Germany. Okay? And they were trading there. And they were accepted. The south of Switzerland was an accepted independent country, part of the Muslim Empire. And the Muslims who controlled Switzerland came from Fraxinet. Fraxinet used to be a part in the south of France, which nowadays is a very small town, insignificant little town somewhere in the south, in the Provence, in the south of France, close to Fréjus, in between Monaco, close to Monaco, all this area, Saint-Tropez. All right? that used to be once a base for the Muslims who had arrived in France. And these were not the Muslims who arrived in France already in the 7th century, because they did go to France in the 7th century, in the 8th century. So from 711 on, when the first Muslims set foot in Al-Andalus, which is nowadays called, what is the city called where the first Muslims set foot? It's a city in Spain, which is not Spanish, where the first Muslims set foot.
It's Gibraltar.
Gibraltar. Why is it called Gibraltar?
Gibraltar.
Because of the Arabic name, Jibr al-Tariq, which means the mountain or the rock or the hill of Tariq. Tariq bin Ziyad was the first Muslim to set foot in Spain and in Europe. Tariq bin Ziyad, that was the name of the general who's first Muslim to set foot in Europe. Okay? And for that reason, this very rock is called Gibraltar, Jibr al-Tariq, Arabic name. Now, just to again make sure that there is no misunderstanding in the audience, because we did have some misunderstanding in other universities, why we're taking it back to the Arabic language is simply because the Arabic language is the language of the Quran and the language of the Muslims. As we have now as the lingua franca being English, and most of us here, this is not our mother tongue. English is not our mother tongue. But English is used as the lingua franca all over the world. Okay? If you go to Thailand, you will not ask them, do you speak Malay? You will ask them, do you speak English? You will not ask them, do you speak Turkish? You will ask them, do you speak English? So English has been recognized as the lingua franca of the world. That time, the lingua franca of the known world was Arabic and Latin. For the Christian side, it was Latin, and for the Muslim side, it was Arabic. Now, Tariq bin Ziyad, again, as wrongly claimed, was not an Arab. He did come from North Africa, but he was not an Arab. He was a Berber. What is a Berber?
North African.
The real indigenous people of North Africa. Before the Arabs went to North Africa, the people in North Africa, and nowadays in countries like in Morocco, the majority of people in Morocco are Berber people. And why are they called Berber? Any idea?
Living in desert.
Sorry?
They're living on the desert and they are not.
So where does this word Berber come from?
think the way
You're playing around with prejudice. They're living in the desert, so they're kind of nomad people, you know, just not important, uncivilized, right? You're playing with prejudice.
They are traveling against.
Okay, good. Again, you're playing with prejudice.
Yeah.
The Greeks, the ancient Greeks used to call them Berbers. You know why? In Greek, when you call somebody barbarian, which is the same root word, that means I do not understand what they are saying. Var. I have no idea what you're saying. So if I call in Greek somebody varvaros, as the Greeks did, anybody who didn't speak Greek, anybody who wasn't part of the Greek civilization, was a barbarian. Because they couldn't understand their language. Var. I don't know what you're saying. Okay? So for that reason, they called anybody non-Greek barbarian. Now, barbarian, the same root for Berber, people in North Africa. Now, anybody else was called by the Greeks barbarian, by the way, you know? All right? So, in ancient times, ancient Greeks, Alexander the Great, for example, when he went deep into Asia, and he went up to India, are you aware that in India, actually nowadays Pakistan, there are villages where people still speak ancient Greek, the ancient Greek dialect of Alexander the Great? There are certain villages in Pakistan where Alexander the Great's language is still alive. Okay? Because that's where he came up to. Plus he got married to one of the Iranian princesses there, or Iranian girls. And she gave him Alexander, the next Alexander, his son. So now if you look at all of this, look how far ancient Greek civilization went to, up to India. Now, if we're looking at Islamic civilization, which came much later as a system, okay, Islam came much later as a system. But that does not mean that Islam ended up somewhere later than Christianity, for example, because if you look at Africa, Africa is actually Islamic long before it was Christian, although Christianity as a system existed. But it was just in certain pockets of Africa. Ethiopia, for example, was the main Christian country and still is in Africa. In North Africa, there are Christian or were Christian countries before. But in the rest of the sub-Saharan Africa, the main religions was paganism and Islam. So just because the system was later does not mean that it came later to certain people. Not at all. Now, Cordoba. What about Moros? What about Moros? Any idea? Moros.
The Philippines.
You're disappointing me. The ones who were here last time, and I'm not going to look at them, they were here last time. You're disappointing me, guys. Come on. What did we say last time? Moros. Who did call who Moros? Yes?
I think the Spain called them, the people come from North Africa Moors.
Good. The Spanish people, in Spanish, they call the Muslims until nowadays, even Moros. Where does this come from again? Of course, where else would it come from?
Morocco?
No. Of course. Of course it's Greek. The womb of European civilization, ladies and gentlemen. No, please, please, now. You know, the womb of European civilization is Greece. It is just simply the case, and not because I'm Greek. It's just simply the case. It is just simply the case. The womb of Greek civilization is Greek. Now, if you look at Moros, it comes from the Greek word mavros, which simply means black. They used to call these people, coming from Africa, black people, instead of calling them Muslims. Now, have you ever heard of Moro Liberation Front? Especially the people from the Malaysian archipelagos? Have you ever heard of the Moro Liberation Front?
Yes.
Who is that?
Yeah. The Malay people.
No, not the Malay. Yeah, well, okay, the people living in
Philippines.
Mindanao, in the south of the Philippines. There's an island called Mindanao. And these people are Muslims, and they're trying to get independence, right, from the rest of the Philippines, which is a Catholic country. And they call themselves, or they were called Moros. You know why? Why were they called Moros?
They want to relate themselves to Spain.
Sorry, say that again?
They want to relate themselves to people from Spain.
Well, when the Spanish people who colonized the Philippines, when they arrived in the Philippines,
Muslims.
they saw darker looking people who were Muslims. In the south, the people are dark. And you know why they are dark? Because there was a connection. Now again, be ready, mind-blowing. There was a connection between the Aborigines in Australia and Indonesia. 200 years before Captain Cook arrived in Australia, in the northern territories of Australia, Darwin and area, there were already Muslim Aborigine villages. Aborigines who were trading with Indonesians, and they accepted Islam. Some of them were taken on board and were taken to the Malay archipelagos, and some of them settled in Indonesia, in Mindanao, and in other parts. That's why you will find nowadays Asian people in that part of the world quite dark. Dark features, strange. Okay? Boom, mind-blowing, isn't it? And imagine, this is nothing. We're just talking about, you know, we have to finish very soon. Now, Europe, just to give you a quick idea, look at Europe. Okay? Now, we're talking about this continent simply because there's a lot to discuss, but we just have a limited time. And when we're talking about the hidden death of Islamic civilization, then it's mainly something that has to do with our continent, what we're living in. Okay? And maybe even more hidden, America, the Caribbean and the Americas. Okay? But that's for another time. If we look at Europe, now we are aware of the east of Europe, which was part of the Ottoman Empire, this whole area here. The Ottomans had reached up to Vienna, Austria. Okay? And that made the German speakers actually scared. Until nowadays, there are German there are certain sayings in German which go back to the Turks, as they call them, the Ottomans. Okay? So, that's Eastern Europe. Then, we have the one that we're discussing now, Spain and Portugal. This entire area is called the Iberian Peninsula. By the Muslims, it was called Al-Andalus. Al-Andalus because, most probably because, the people who were living there before, the Gothic Germanic tribe that was living there before, when the Muslims arrived, there were some Germanic, Gothic people. They were called Vandals. Vandals. And most probably, from that time, that name was taken over by the Muslims and they started calling them Andalusians, Al-Andalus. Now, so, we're talking about Spain and Portugal. Portugal became an independent Christian country long before Spain as a whole. And that's why Portugal couldn't go into Europe anymore after the Muslims were still in Spain, they had to go there, that side. So where did they go to? The Portuguese, so-called, discovered what? They started the biggest empire first. They started the Portuguese Empire in the biggest country in South America, which is Brazil. Okay? And then 5 other countries in Africa, okay, especially the biggest ones, Angola and Mozambique, up to Goa and India. Massive empire. The first one to start, the first European empire to start. Okay? Okay, so these are 2 entries. So the Muslims coming from the North Africa, from Africa, going into Spain, Portugal, reaching France, and up to Switzerland. Another part came, as we said later, the Ottomans. That was Eastern Europe. And then we had some other Muslims arriving in the south of Italy, Sicily. Sicily used to be part of the Muslim Empire for 250 years. If you go nowadays to Sicily, you will be able to see nothing else but more Greek or Muslim evidence of people who have been there, because Sicily is entirely either Greek or it's Muslim. You know, you would say a lot of Islamic reminders and a lot of Greek reminders, especially in Sicily. And these are the main people who shaped culture and civilization in Sicily. The language, the Sicilian dialect of Italian, has a lot of Arabic words. Okay? Now, again, this gives you a better idea of the Mediterranean Sea. What we're talking about, the Mediterranean Sea is obviously also the area where culture and civilization for Europe developed, especially Greece, especially the island of Crete. This island here, the island of Crete, and then of course civilizations above here, you know, in the rest of Greece, Cyprus, in what is nowadays Turkey, okay, and so on and so on. Now, anybody any idea what this is? Cordoba, very good, excellent, Cordoba, and this is the mosque in Cordoba. Does this remind you of a mosque in Africa? That's a mosque, yes indeed. And you're right to be surprised. Thank you. Why are you surprised? Because you expect to see some Moroccan-looking minarets and everything, right? And that's exactly the point that I'm trying to make here. It's not. It is a Spanish mosque, because Islam was Spanish in Spain for 700 years, Portuguese in Portugal for 500 years, Greek in Greece for 550 years. What I want to say with that, we had Spanish Muslims. These were not Arab Muslims. They were not Muslims from the Muslim world. The Muslim world at that time was Spain. Spain and Portugal was part of the Muslim world for 700 years. And I don't really think that 700 years is something that just, you know, goes away. We're talking about 700 years. Not 7, not 70, 700 years. And until nowadays, if you go to the south of Spain, you will be able to see some of the relics from that time. Now this is one example, okay, the Mosque of Cordoba. Again, as you can see, it has no indication that it came from the Arab world or from North Africa. It is very Spanish. And it's a point that I'm trying to make always. That's the insight, okay? It's always a point that I'm trying to make. We're living in this country. I'm very European. I'm probably more European than any one of you here. I'm double European. My children are triple European. I have a Greek and a German passport. Don't tell the Germans that they wouldn't accept it. The Greeks, you know, the other way around. So in Greece, I can just show my Greek passport, right? In Germany, just my German passport, right? I'm not allowed to show anything else, okay? Now, in the rest of the world, I of course travel as a German, right? You really think they would allow the Greeks to Australia? You know, too many of them. So, as a European, as Europeans, and as a Muslim European, we have to make sure that Islam is not something that came from outside. Okay? Islam is not something that belongs to the outside world. But it is very European as our brothers in Albania and Kosovo and Montenegro and Bosnia and Turkey and so on. And that's Eastern Europe. Now in Western Europe, we used to have people living in Spain and in Portugal and in Italy and in France and in Switzerland, all European Muslims. All of them were European Muslims. Many of them had accepted the deen, many of them became Muslim after they came in contact with the Muslims, but some of them came from outside. We had Berbers, we had Arabs, we had Turks, we had people who came from other parts of the world. But the majority were actually European reverts. Okay, like in my case. So that means Islam became very indigenous. 700 years. I mean, how long do we need to be part of Europe to finally realize that Islam is part of European civilization as well? 700, not 50 and 60. As far as I know, in this country, you know, in the 60s or the 70s, Asian, as you call them Asian, Pakistani, Indians, Bangladeshis, so these people who came from Asia, from the Indian subcontinent, they are now British passport holders, and they've been recognized as British passport holders, British people. This is 60, 70 years ago. What about 700 years? What about 700 years? You want to now tell me that the Spaniards that time in Spain were not Spanish Muslims? Okay. Now, the inside, the outside by night, absolutely great to see the building. Where is this?
Alhambra.
Granada? Alhambra, somebody said, right? The Alhambra. It's a fortune, it's worth it to go and see. Now, unfortunately, it's mixed up. This is again the inside of the mosque in Cordoba, we saw. An amazing building, really interesting to go and visit. Okay? Now, just gives you an idea of what it looks like, of what Islamic civilization, hidden Islamic civilization in Europe looks like, and especially in Spain at the moment. We're still busy with that. Now, this is the Islamic center of Madrid, by the way. Madrid itself was established by the Muslims. The city itself, the capital of Spain, was established by the Muslims. Now, if you look at this one, this is a mosque that we all recognize as a mosque. What do you think is this? Gibraltar. That's the place where Tariq bin Ziyad arrived first. Gibraltar. And because Gibraltar is still British, alhamdulillah, thanks to God, it's still British, because otherwise we would have the discrimination we have in Spain. Unfortunately, it's like this. Because it's British, the Muslims have a lot of freedom there. And we have to say that, and I want to say that every time. Not because I want to slime or something. No, but I have chosen to come to this country in 2001. I didn't have to. I could have gone anywhere else. Okay, I've chosen to come to this very country in 2001 with my family, raising my children in this country, simply because this country is still the only country in Europe which allows so much freedom for the Muslims. We have to just say that, and we have to just praise that also. Okay, we have some, you know, we might have some people, you know, who might disagree with me, but that's fine, you have the right to disagree, it's no problem at all. But if you look around, and if you look at Europe, this very country gives us so many rights. This very country gives us an eyesore that I'm standing here having a talk with you. In Germany, I would not be able to do that. I would most probably have been already in prison if I started to talk like this. I'm not joking. In France, I wouldn't have been allowed on the university campus. So, imagine, really. Now, Portugal. Okay, if you look at Portugal, I want you to pay attention to certain names. Do you see, what does it say here? Almada. What does it say here? Alcácer. What do you see? What kind of words are these? Arabic. Everything that starts with al is Arabic. Alcohol is Arabic. Why they laugh? It was invented by Muslim scientists, okay, for scientific purpose. Like ganja can be used, I hope you understand what I just said, right? Ganja can be used for scientific purposes, for medical purposes, there's no problem with that. But to use it the way that people misuse both of them, ganja and alcohol, that's the problem. Okay? Right? So, now, Portugal, this is the Islamic center of Portugal. We have some curiosities nowadays in the world. We have some curious, weird phenomena. We have countries where there are barely no Muslim, and we have Islamic centers, like in that case in Portugal and Lisbon. There are 40,000 Muslims that all the whole country has. And we have countries like Greece, Athens, where we have 1 million Muslims and we have no Islamic center. So, you know, you can see, you know, opposites, okay? And you can see that there are issues. There still are issues. So this is a massive Islamic center in Lisbon. Again, as I said, 40,000 Muslims. That's all there is in Portugal. This is a reminder of the Muslim past in Portugal. Okay, a Muslim fountain, an Islamic fountain, a Moorish fountain as they call it, because you remember they used to call them Moors. Okay, in English, Moor. And this gives you the whole idea of the caliphate, of the Islamic empire in the Iberian Peninsula, which was called Al-Andalus. That's how big it was, okay? So as you can clearly see, Lisboa, as they call it in Portuguese nowadays, it's also an Arabic word, by the way, Lisboa, Lisbon, this used to be entirely Muslim, Portugal, up to here. This is Spain up to France, into France and the south of France, Narbonne. Okay? This all used to be called Al-Andalus. Now, this shows you the development of Al-Andalus, so how it became, how the Muslims lost it more and more. So basically from the north, we had a very small enclave, the one that you saw before. This one here, this in the north, Asturias, that the Muslims never went to. They allowed the Christian royalties to go up and to emigrate up there, basically, and stay there and make their own empire there. But that was a mistake. Militarily, it was a mistake by the Muslims, because these very people from up there, the Christians, gained more and more power because the Muslims lost more and more power. That's how simple it is. And they came in 750, it was already that big, the Christian empire. 800, that's how big it was already there. And that's how it went on until the last city, Granada, fell in 1492. The very same time, 1492, when Christopher Columbus, so-called, you know what did he do? He discovered America. You know, they were waiting there for him to discover. So he didn't discover anything, he just bumped into America, right, by accident, as we all know. And after that, the genocide of the real Americans started, as the genocide of the Aborigines, of the real Australians started after that, right? Right? We just have to be open with it. As Europeans, we have to admit we have a history which is quite bloody. Okay? As Europeans, we have to admit we have a quite strong history, actually, if you look at it. Now, that gives you an idea from where the Muslims came from. They came from North Africa, right? North Africa, a better idea. And Italy, last but not least. I wanted to mention this one still for today. Now, I'm going to mention Italy simply because if we look at Al-Andalus as a specific geographic area, I want to look at Al-Andalus as a time of a period from 711 to 1492. Within this very time of 711 to 1492, that was the time when the Muslims had opened Sicily, the south of Italy, Faxine, well, some parts in France, Spain and Portugal, and Malta. Okay? So in that very time, the Al-Andalus time, which is not only geographically, okay, you should not just take it as a geographic area, but periodically in a time period, in a time frame, the Muslims had already reached a big part of the south of Europe. And Italy was a part. And I'm going, inshallah, and I just wanted to mention this one again. I got 3 books that I have for sale today here, which are in the series of the Islamic heritage of Europe. One deals with Vienna, the Ottomans in Vienna. You will not believe, but in Vienna there are more than 200 monuments that remind you of the Ottomans. One deals with Hungary. Hungary used to be 150 years part of the Ottoman Empire. And the other one deals with Greece, for more than 500 years part of the Ottomans. So please take a look at what I have here. Plus 2 DVDs. The one is entirely the whole of Greece, 4 DVD set, and 1 DVD with the Ottoman, the 3 Ottoman capitals. I have them here, so take a look at them, what I have. So now my next project is in April. I'm going to Italy, inshallah. In Italy, I'm in the south of Italy, from Rome down. And this was the part where the Muslims still left some heritage behind. You will not believe, but there are fountains, like this one here in Italy still. You will also see some reminders, like this used to be a mosque, it became a Catholic church after the Muslims left. And if you look at Venice, have the Muslims ever been to Venice? No. The Muslims never reached Venice. But the Venetians, who were a big trade nation at that time, together with the Ottomans, they copied from the Ottomans Islamic architecture, like in that case, the palace in Venice. Look at this. This is Islamic architecture. The arches, very Islamic. And Gothic architecture that developed later is actually a copy of Islamic architecture. Okay? That is how cultures and civilizations develop, by the way. Languages develop like this. We have to be aware of that, you know. We have to really know that our civilization, any civilization, developed only because of the contact with each other. If we isolate ourselves and everybody does their own thing, there will be no contact, there will be no development. There will be no development. In contrast to certain people saying we don't need immigration in a country, this whole world is built on immigration. The whole world is built on immigration, on cultural exchange, on civilization, on language exchange. Languages develop because of contact of people and cultures. All right? So, now, that again is the palace, the arches, okay? And the island of Sicily, which was 250 years part of the Muslim world. As you can see again, Palermo used to be the capital of the Muslims, and it used to be called the city of 300 minarets for obvious reasons. Nowadays, if I take you to Palermo, there is not even one minaret there. Okay? Now, there are cities like Marsala. You can clearly see it is an Islamic name, a Muslim name, an Arabic name, Marsala, the port of Allah. Now, another city, Mazara del Vallo, that's where the first Muslims arrived, and until nowadays, Mazara del Vallo is a city which is majority, or certain parts have a big Muslim immigrant population. Okay? And so on and so on. There's a lot to discover. So, I urge you again, just take a look at my work that I've done until now. There's a lot to discuss still, but I was also asked to keep it short today. Keep it short and sweet. And we're going to stop here now, and whoever wants to support these kind of projects that I'm doing, as I said again, next month in April I will be in Italy, inshallah. All this costs money. I do not get any money from any Qatari, Kuwaiti, Saudi. Okay? I'm paying everything out of my own pocket. So please take a look at my work, and if you want to support the work that I'm doing, thank you very much for being here. Jazakumullah khair.
Okay, so now the Sheikh would like to answer any questions for about a 15-minute Q&A session, inshallah. So if anyone has any questions, then please raise your hand.
Amen. Could you take the mic around with you?
No questions? Happy everyone? Yes, please.
I'll pass
Yeah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First of all, thank you, Brother Stef.
Yes.
Keris.
Yes. I believe if I put the whole Greek name, they wouldn't be able to read it. So be happy when I have this. It's good enough. So yes.
Thank you. Thank you for the amazing talk just now. I'm just wondering if every expansion in Islamic civilization across the world is merely from war, or another thing is.
Okay. Thank you very much. A very good question indeed. Islam was spread by the sword, right? Islam was spread by the sword. Now, why did the Muslims go to Spain? We didn't mention that. Why did the Muslims go to Al-Andalus? Any idea?
Trade.
Because that time there was a lot to gain from Spain, right? It was a very high civilization, right? The Goths were high civilized people, right? No, not at all. The way that Islamic civilization came over to Spain, there was a ruler in the north of Morocco who was ruling Ceuta, which is nowadays still a Spanish enclave in the north of Morocco. Still, it belongs to Spain nowadays. And he was ruling Ceuta. And he asked that time, Musa ibn Nusayr was the Sultan of North Africa, he asked him, can you help me with your mighty Muslim army? Get me the throne from Spain, and I give you Ceuta. And Musa said, okay, you know what, I want Africa, the whole of Africa. They used to call Ceuta Africa because that's the only part that was still non-Muslim. So they said, yes, okay, I want that part. So I will send Tariq over there, see how it looks, and then we see further. So he sent Tariq bin Ziyad to Spain with 4,000 people. Within 3, 4, 5 years, these 4,000 became 20,000. Now I want you to tell me, who goes to war and gains people instead of losing people? They were all men, by the way. From 4,000, these people became 20. How come? How come? Because the Jews and the Christians felt suppressed by the Visigoths who were living there before, under their rule, and they supported the Muslim rule rather than the Visigoth, the Germanic rule. And many of them embraced Islam and joined Tariq bin Ziyad. Many of them did not have to embrace Islam, but the Jews, for example, they joined, and they helped the Muslims to move further. So now, in that case, yes, they came there with the sword, but you know what? They didn't have to fight a lot, because the others did the work for them already. And if you consider that within 7 years, the Muslims reached already 50, 60 kilometers in front of Paris. Okay, Tours and Poitiers. The famous battles in Tours and Poitiers, for the French very important. They reached up to there. This is 50, 60, 70 kilometers in front of Paris. If they reach within 7 years up there, then I want you to tell me this massive Iberian Peninsula, you know, nobody could keep them back in 7 years. In the contrary, people joined them. One. Second, if you look at the spread of Islam in Asia, are you from? Where are you from? Malaysia. Now, your very country, Malaysia, Indonesia, okay, these countries. How did Islam spread over there? By the sword?
Trade.
Of course not. By trade. Everybody should know that by now. Islam spread in Indonesia, the biggest Muslim country in the world, by trade. Through trade. Trade. It was business people who arrived there. The indigenous people saw them, saw how honorable they were that time. And people would say, please go and buy from Muslims. You know what? I wouldn't do that nowadays. I wouldn't tell you go and buy Muslims. Unfortunately, we have to be honest here. We have to be very honest here. Unfortunately, nowadays we have a lot of crazy, gangsters in the Muslim world, okay? Now, at that time, the Muslims were honorable people, right? They were trustworthy people. There were people, business people, who would tell you, listen, you know what? Today, I don't want you to buy dates from me because they're not good. But you know what? Down there, Ahmed has better dates. Please go and buy there. This is the way that the Muslims would deal. Non-Muslim and Muslim alike. It didn't matter at that time. Okay? Now, how did Islam spread in Africa? From Egypt down, and not only. Who embraced the first ruler in the world to embrace Islam was who? An-Najashi, the king of Ethiopia. Ethiopia, the very Christian country nowadays, right? 50-60% Muslims in that country. Suppressed. Okay? Discriminated against. But the original, their king accepted Islam as the first ruler on this planet. Do you know that? Islam got established in Ethiopia and Africa first before it got established in Arabia. Muhammad was still fighting against the Quraysh, the Meccans in Arabia. The Arabian pagans were still fighting him. But in Africa, Islam had reached already Africa. So this is massive. And it didn't go there by sword. These people had no swords to go to him. That time they were persecuted against, okay? So, I don't think that we see a lot of sword here. Of course battles and fights happen. But hey, we don't want to contrast it to the Christian history, right? We don't want to contrast Muslim history with regards to battle and fights to the Crusaders and to others, right? We don't want to start there, right? Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
Any more questions?
Was any of the kings of United Kingdom a Muslim?
Isham is trying to get me to say that King Offa used to be a Muslim, right? Are you trying to say that? There used to be a king here, King Offa, okay, in the 9th century. And if you have the chance to go to London British Museum, please go. It's fantastic, amazing, great museum anyway. If you go there and if you go to the coin section, you will be able to find coins from the time of King Offa, 9th century, 800. During that time, they found coins that were minted by King Offa, and on the one side it said Rex Offa, which in Latin means King Offa, and on the other side it says La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. The very same minted coin here in this country by King Offa had the Shahada, the declaration of faith on the one side. Now, of course, the Muslims love this, so now they go around and say King Offa might have been Muslim, and we don't know. We don't know. But we know that he had very close contact to Harun al-Rashid. There was the time of Al-Andalus being a massively important empire, and everybody was looking up to Al-Andalus at that time. The Europeans, there was a fashion at that time in Paris and in London, European elite people would run around with turbans and long thobes, okay, looking like an Arab, as they call it, or Andalusi, okay, because they wanted to look like these people in Al-Andalus, because that time, the high civilization between 700 and 1000 was nowhere close to any European civilization. It was the civilization in Spain, in Muslim Spain and Portugal. That time in Cordoba, the capital of the Muslims, that time in Cordoba, there were street lights. There were street lights that time in the 8th, 9th, 10th century. Europeans would come and study at the universities in Cordoba, and they would go back to Europe and tell them, listen guys, they had street lights there. We're like, these guys are crazy. What are you talking about? Street lights, what is that? How did you do that? There were hammams, bathhouses. Okay? So imagine the civilization. Imagine how high it was that time. So with regards to British kings being Muslims, we know that even crusaders who went down to fight the Crusades, there was an English one who accepted, I don't remember his name anymore, from St. Albans. He accepted Islam when he was down in the Holy Land and married Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, Saladin, you know, one of his nieces. So there is European blood from, in the Arab world already from that time. Okay? So there are cases of British accepting Islam, or English people accepting Islam already in the 8th and 9th century. There are. But we don't have exact evidence for everything. Okay? But there are. Anything
Any
else?
more questions? Yes, on the other side.
How then did the Islamic civilization decline?
Okay, it's a very big subject. Thank you very much that you mentioned this one. Yes, we're talking about the rise, but what about the fall? Now, how did Islamic civilization in Spain decline, in Sicily? How did it decline in Portugal, and so on and so on? Very simple. There is an up and there is a down. Allah says in the Quran. Allah says in the Quran that He says that you are given, every people are given a certain time period. Everybody on this planet was given, the ancient Greeks were given, the Egyptians were given, the Syrians were given, everybody was given a certain time. And they have to prove themselves within this time. As long as the Muslims they were holding on the rope of Islam, like the first 300-400 years in Spain, as long as they were holding then, you could see the difference in structure between and after 1000. As long as they were holding on the rope of Allah, Allah was helping them. So it was not about territorial victories, but it was about civilization. But after 1100, 1200, you saw the decline of the Muslims already in Spain because they started fighting each other. They started fighting each other, brother against brother. Some of them siding with non-Muslims against the Muslims. So Spain got divided into small taifas, into small areas, fighting against each other. The decline started like this, the same in Sicily. The same in all over the world. Everywhere in the world, it was the same thing. The Ottomans had the same problem everywhere. Fighting each other. But as long as, you know, God will help you as long as you follow His rules. If you don't follow His rules, why should He help you? Okay, and I believe firmly that. So yes, of course, ancient Greek civilization was very high. Also, the Byzantine Empire was for around 1,000 years, a massive empire. But look at the development of the empires. Look at the beginning, how people lived and what kind of structures they were building. And look at towards the end. You see the difference. So, you know, let's not become too arrogant. Let's not become too, keep our nose high like certain people do nowadays. There is a country nowadays, they think they will last forever. But if they look back to history, and we have the right to look back into history, and realize that also this country will once fall. Also this empire will once fall. Empires rise and fall. That's a normal, that if there is a formula in history, then this is the formula. You know, we just don't know the exact time. Anything else? Yes.
Where do you see the future of Muslims in Europe? Looking at the present situation.
Yes, it's an excellent question, a very sad question, you know. Normally, you know, for this question, I would read out what happened in 1992 to 1995, eyewitness reports in Bosnia. 1992, 1995, I don't know how many of you, how old you were at that time, but that happened in this very continent. Indigenous Muslims who spoke the same language that everybody else around them spoke in a country called Yugoslavia. There was once a country called Yugoslavia. Many of you might not be aware of it, but we drove through, when I was living in Germany with my parents, we used to drive every year in summer, we used to drive through Yugoslavia to go to Greece. And Yugoslavia, I remember, was such a massively big country. 25 hours it took my father from the north to the south to drive through. That time I didn't know anything else. Nobody knew anything but Yugoslavian people. Until the war broke out in the 90s, and we realized that there are people in Bosnia who declare themselves Muslims. There are people who are Croats, you know, Catholic people, and so on and so on. And now we have a country which got divided in from one big massive entity, it became 7. 7. And among them, the biggest losers of that were the Muslims. Why do I say that? Not because I'm a Muslim. All this led me to Islam, by the way. All this history that I'm telling you here now, I knew already before I became Muslim, and this led me to Islam. Because if people tell you lies about your history, like my Greek teachers used to tell me in primary school, that make me think. If they tell me lies about the Ottoman Empire, then why would they cover such an important history and would tell me lies? So I looked deeper into it, and that brought me to Islam. And I found out that they were telling me lies about Islam as well. So that means there must be something in Islam. And people nowadays in media do the same things nowadays, by the way. Nowadays they do exactly the same things. They lie to you, okay, to make you appalled, to be appalled by this deen which is called Islam. But you know what? Since September 11, and since now, you know, London and the whole issue in Paris, in France, the biggest conversion rate of French people has been after Paris. The biggest conversion rate of European Americans was after September 11. So people who start looking into Islam and start reading the Quran and realize what Islam really is, they accept Islam, many of them. So instead of pushing them away, you're pulling them towards it. With regards to our future in Europe, you know, I'm not going to tell you what I think, but I'm just going to make you think about what happened 20 years ago in this very continent. 15 to 20 years ago, 1992 to 1995, Yugoslavian people were killing and massacring their people, their neighbors. Do you know how perverted this war was, Bosnian War? It was so perverted actually that there was people who were living on a daily basis with the same people every day next to each other. They were friends. They would invite each other to each other's feasts and celebrations. And these very people started wearing a uniform, and the very next day, they would rape the very same neighbor they had invited last year to Christmas, for Christmas over. It was such a pervert, really such a, you know, unbelievable. It was the worst massacre after the Second World War in Europe. The worst genocide after the Second World War in Europe. So that's all I'm giving you to think about. The situation at this moment does not look good. Okay? We know that. Media, they're playing their role. Now, unfortunately, we are all influenced by media. Even Muslims are influenced by the media. We have to now look into what does it actually really mean and why does it play this kind of role that it plays. But I do not know what our future in Europe tells. If I look back at the Christian Europe history, Christian Muslim history, and I look at Spain, for 700 years, Muslim and Christians were living together in Spain. It didn't last longer than 7 under the Christian rule. Under Christian rule, Queen Isabella, when she arrived in Granada, they signed a treaty, and they broke, the very same people broke the treaty. So they couldn't last long with the Jews and the Muslims. Whereas Jews and Christians could live under Muslim rule for 700 years. They were living for 250 years with each other in Sicily. As soon as the Normans took over, end of story. In Sicily, there's not one Muslim anymore. In Portugal, as soon as the Portuguese Christians took over, end of story, no Portuguese Muslim anymore. You know, I mean, is it not something that I'm saying? I want you to look at the history. And unfortunately, it seems not to be possible for a Christian-ruled country to have Muslims among themselves, and Jews, by the way. I don't think it's possible. Whereas the other way around, history proved that it's like this, it's possible. You know? So, and now, what has developed is, we're not talking about secular countries. We're talking about countries where religion doesn't play a role, it's not supposed to play a role anymore. But this very queen of this country is also the representative of the Anglican Church in this country. So it's not that secular. Whereas France claims to be very secular. But look at the rules in France. I don't think I have to say a lot about France. So, I don't know. But it doesn't look good. It doesn't look good. Honestly, it doesn't look good. Unfortunately.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Don't worry, I'll just say it out loud. What would you say about the fall of the Islamic community since the fall of Baghdad, and how come you never rose since then?
Baghdad fell in 1258 with regards to the Mongols, but Baghdad was just one of the capitals. After that, the Ottomans took over. So are you talking about the end of the...
Islamic science hasn't risen as much as it was.
That's true. That's very, very true. Yes, that's very true. Islamic science, mainly in Al-Andalus, of course, yes. Yeah. Look, there were many mistakes that the Ottomans made, okay, as the last caliphate. All right? So, but that does not mean, as the Arabs claim, they say that the Turks, the Turkish Ottomans, were not capable of ruling the empire as the Umayyads or the Abbasids, the Arab speakers or Arabs before were. But this is not entirely true, because the Ottoman Empire lasted from 1299 to 1923. They just happened to be the last ones. Now, they did not catch up with the development in Europe at the time. They were in the time where the Renaissance took over in Europe. There was in the time the Industrial Revolution took over in Europe. All these things did not catch up in the Muslim world. The Muslim world did not have this. There was no Industrial Revolution in the Muslim world. There was no scientific revolution, if you want to, because actually it had existed already before, but they didn't take it with them. So in the Ottoman Empire, the Ottomans left a lot of things that were already invented or were there by the Muslims before. They did not consider them so much. They tried to even copy the Europeans later, but the wrong copy. They copied them in the wrong way. They didn't copy the right direction, they copied the wrong direction. Okay? So what happened with Islamic civilization, actually, it fell simply because they were not paying attention to what the original rule of Islamic civilization was. Okay? If you look at the beginning of the Ottoman Empire from 1299 to 1500, Suleiman's time, around this time, then you see also that they are mighty, they are powerful, their science is also part of their life. But from 1550 on, 1600, you know, the Ottomans actually just existed because the Europeans were weak. Okay, otherwise they would have been gone for long. So they lost it. They just lost it. They just lost it already in the 15th, 16th century. They lost it. And under the Ottomans, not necessarily in Baghdad, not only under the Abbasids, but also under the Ottomans. Okay? Or, yeah, later actually, also under the Ottomans. Yeah? Yeah?
Thank you very much for all your answers. And if anybody does have any more questions, then the doctor will be at the front to take anything you might want to say. So I'd now like to pass to the President of the IAW to thank on behalf of all of us the doctor for speaking. A round of applause.